Hey, all, Rob Cairns here with the SDM show. In today's podcast, I sit down with Christopher Wright, a security expert, and we talk about all things computer security, including the latest Solarwinds debacle. So grab your favorite drink, please sit down, and enjoy this very insightful conversation I had with Chris. 3, 4. Hey, everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm here with my friend Chris Wright, who is a well known security expert. How are you today, Chris?
I'm good. I don't know if I'd say I'm well known. I'm well known around these parts, but
Yeah, that's not a bad thing, though. I mean, local is important. Um,
yeah.
how did you get into the computer security IT side of business, first of all?
Oh, well, in the IT side of things, I've always been around computers. I was programming in third grade, long time ago on black and green screens. But I got into cybersecurity when I was in the Air Force. I was an officer in the U.S. Air Force for about 12 years, and about 3 or 4 years into that, I got pushed into I guess, effectively a cybersecurity job. We called it information operations.
Yeah.
I worked a lot with people who did like psychological operations, military deception, intelligence work, things like that. So it was a bit of a different path into it. And I always tell people that colors how I look at cybersecurity, as being not just a technical thing, but it's there's a lot more to the discipline than just the IT side of things. But that kind of started me down the road, and I weaved through some other jobs in the Air Force. Spent some time with Air Force Space Command, doing some security testing on their ground systems all over the country. Worked for the MITRE Corporation for a while, doing testing on U.S. federal government agencies and contractors. And moved back to Arkansas after traveling the world for many years, and worked at FIS, a global financial technology payment processing company. Built and managed their vulnerability management program there, and then stepped out on my own freelance for a little while. And then about 2 years ago, joined up with one of my freelancing partners and created an IT and cybersecurity services business that focuses on other small businesses here in Arkansas and the region.
Yeah, that's a really interesting path, different from a lot of people have gone into that.
Yeah.
And like I started in technology and started in programming probably when I was 15, so or 14 or 13 or something like that. So I've been around it forever. So I get that side of it. Um, as we jump into cybersecurity, we might as well hit the big story of the last 2 weeks we're talking about before we started recording, and that's SolarWinds.
Absolutely.
What does that mean for the average person? And kind of preamble it a little bit. People who don't understand, SolarWinds is a cybersecurity firm that was hacked in the last couple of weeks. They've got ties to the Pentagon. They've got ties to all major banks in Canada and the US, and they're kind of everywhere. So, what does it mean to the average person?
Um, in a lot of ways, that's yet to be determined. Kind of the direct effect on the individual is very minimal. SolarWinds has been around for many years. They're a really well-known network management tool developer and vendor. So kind of in large data center environments, they've been around for 20, 30 plus years. We used them years ago in big data centers in the Air Force. Had their tools. They were kind of the pristine, top tier tools that we could get our hands on to manage our data centers or different testing environments and things like that. But there's a lot of kind of nuance to it. There is a portion of SolarWinds that works with small businesses and works with businesses like ours, that manages IT for other small businesses. But so far, everything I've seen says that portion of SolarWinds was not affected by this. It was just the larger network management tool portion of that. So we've had to answer some questions to some of our businesses. We have a peer and competitor. I say peer and competitor, because technically they're a competitor around here, but everybody in the IT space knows each other in
Yeah.
Arkansas mostly, and we all get along pretty well. We're all friendly with each other, but they use that small business managed service provider platform, and so we had some worries on some clients that have come to us from them, that we've had to kind of talk people off the ledge for recently. But really, when it comes to kind of the everyday person, we're going to see effects here like potentially more like what you would have seen from like Target or Home Depot or the Equifax hack. Probably that's the closest it's going to get to the everyday user. The biggest, I think, portion of this to take away is that this was a nation state attacker, as most people have attributed this to the Russian intelligence services. And that is, they have different motivations. We look at people and we think people are just hacking to get money from you or something like that. And there are quite a few attackers out there, like organized crime and some small scale, kind of small scale beginning to organized crime type attackers. They're really hitting after money. So they're trying to get money from people. Well, the nation state attackers are really trying to, kind of do one of two things, and that's to gather information or gather intelligence, or disrupt different systems that kind of allows our country to operate, allows our society to operate. And so we'll see the full fallout of this. We've been watching these kind of attackers. I mean, my first day in cybersecurity back in 2004, I was, an article was dropped on my desk talking about Chinese attackers getting into the Department of Defense and their contractors and stealing information on, the F-22 and the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter to, be able to create this on their own, in their own military. And so the Russian intelligence service operates somewhat like that, but they also kind of operate along the long centuries old historical precedent of Russia just kind of sticking its thumb into things just to mess up the waters there. They're not always looking to get classified data, intelligence data, design data, or anything like that. Sometimes they're just trying to muck up the works in other countries. And this has been a long-standing kind of Russian thing since, Catherine the Great. So we're talking hundreds of years. That's been kind of their country's modus operandi. Which that's what, when I look at these things, I always say that I have a little bit of different perspective in cybersecurity because I worked in that intelligence world when I first got into it. And you can look back and see, okay, when the Chinese attackers attack, they're looking for this. When Russian attackers attack, they're looking for this. When North Korean attackers attack, they're looking for something else. So.
Yeah, so true. And nation state attacks happen all the time. Like I'll give you an example, and I've been caught up in a little bit of one lately. So CRA, which is the Canada Revenue Agency, just similar to the IRS, they were hacked 3 times in the last year. And recently, I went through an incident a couple of weeks ago where money went into my bank account, money came out of my bank account. But because I've worked on my own until recently, my account number was nowhere except for my wife, myself, and the Canada Revenue Agency. So I can attribute it directly to somebody having access to my account information from CRA. Now, what I can tell you is the money that went in my account went in via China, and the money that came out of my account tried to go, which was the same money that went in, was trying to go to another Canadian bank. It smells of money laundering, to be honest with you. But again, and everybody's saying, how's that possible? Where's your debit card? And I said, my bank card's sitting in front of me. So things do happen, but you have to be aware of what's going on. Right, Chris?
Oh, it's so much more complex. I think a lot of people, when you're talking to kind of your regular average person, they don't understand the complexity of where all this data flows and just how easy it is to get these kind of things. I mean, the fact that your credit card number is is just an algorithm to generate that number, to determine if that number is a valid number or not. You don't need to have stolen your credit card number to actually have, to use that credit card number. And even it's harder to kind of guess at those things with all the additional protections that we've put in place. But even with that, your credit card number flows around in so many different places that we don't even know. People who want to kind of go off the grid, and I don't know that that's really truly possible in the year 2020, 2021 anymore.
I would agree with you. A lot of people think cybersecurity starts with social re-engineering is a big problem. We've all heard that term. There was a hacker, and I'm sure you're aware of him, a guy by the name of Kevin Mitnick. You know Kevin, yeah. And he wrote a book called The Art of Deception, which is one of my favorite books. He's still the FBI's #1 security consultant after going to jail.
Yeah,
And for those who don't know, Kevin's business card is actually a lockpick kit on his business card. And he talked in his book about the whole advent of social re-engineering and working your stuff through. What do you see out in what your company's doing with social re-engineering?
Yeah, so that's the biggest threat that we see to the small business arena. Small businesses have so little network kind of space. They're not. We would call it the attack surface. They have very little that's actually visible on the internet, and the real way to get into a lot of these small businesses is through the employees. And so we put a lot of emphasis on training and finding the right kind of augmenting systems to handle these social engineering attacks. And I say augmenting systems because again, a lot of people that are totally technology focused want to come in and they just want to start, what technology solution can I put in place to fix the problem? And specifically in social engineering, that has been the wrong approach. And for many years in cybersecurity, we just said, hey, the user can't be trusted. Let's, make it where they don't need to they don't need to make a decision, or they don't need to make a choice. And we've failed miserably at that because we have not taken into account, that these social engineers are doing everything they can to bypass those technical controls we put in place. And those technical controls take so much more engineering than just educating a user to say, this is what this looks like, be wary of this. And when you teach that computer to be wary of something, it's very exacting. That signature has to be perfect, and it has to match that signature perfectly for that computer to take action. But when you train that end user goes, well, this kind of looks a little bit like what Chris told me about, a month ago. I'm going to call somebody up and get a second opinion on this, or I'm going to, send it over to Chris and see what he says on this. And so that human brain works a lot more, kind of it can branch out, and it can, see things that look kind of like something. But that triggers those hairs in the back of your neck to stand up and, you to question that, and ultimately not click on it, not run that software, not open that document, not enter your credentials, not do the thing that the attacker wants you to do.
Yeah, it's so true. And I can remember we were talking before we went to record that I worked with one of Toronto's biggest hospitals, and I was actually the team leader for the on-call team for client services. So we got all the front-end requests, and I can distinctly remember a night where somebody put a help desk request in. Our operator working called me at home and said, Rob, you're on call. What do you think? And I said, honestly, don't change his password. Don't give him what he wants. If he wants to scream up the line to a VP level, let me deal with it. Just say no. And it turned out he was illegitimate, and he even tried to scream to the CTO at the time. And the CTO got me on the phone and said, you're saying no? I said, yeah. I said, you want him in your network? And it turned out, after investigation the next day, he was trying to social engineer himself on Christmas Day of all days at midnight into the hospital network. Mm-hmm. And we picked up on it, and we turned out he was total fraud, had no authorization, no nothing. And it was just, you just got to learn, you're almost better to say no and let it fall where it falls than to do something you shouldn't do, right?
So. Yeah. That's what I tell users all the time. I was like, look, I'd rather have you call me
Yeah.
and me to spend 2 seconds telling you that something is legit or something is not legit than you not call me, fall for it, and then for us to spend weeks or months trying to clean up the mess.
Yeah.
But
And
it's the intricacy of it's amazing. I did a several months ago, actually probably over a year ago now. I did a story with a local reporter here in Little Rock, and she had been socially engineered by scammers trying to get into her bank account.
yeah.
And the scammers had her on one line and had the bank on the other line, and were basically pretending to be the bank to her and pretending to be her to the bank and relaying information back, getting her to the second factor authentication data from her and relating back to the bank. And they were kind of playing man in the middle over the phone in real time, against this person who did not, at the time know what that was. And once she found out that she had been attacked and successfully social engineered, she's like, I need to go do a story on this and make sure that everybody else knows what's going on. And so we did a pretty in-depth kind of expose on that to get the news out. But when she told me that, I was like, wow, that's intense, for something that's kind of so individualistic and is going to get, probably so little money out of somebody. That's a lot of work for an attacker to put into that.
Yeah, it sure is actually. Um, as we move on, we small businesses. What's a couple wins a small business can do right away that you would say?
I can think of several off the top of my head. First and foremost would be get your employees some training. Probably that's the easiest and quickest win. It's not perfect. That security awareness training and anything that's really a process or anything with humans involved is not a perfect solution to any of these problems, but it does give you so much of a return on investment, especially in small businesses, because the small business employees usually feel more like they're part of the family. So that business is theirs just as much as it is the owner, at least in our small businesses that we work with, where you've got people who have worked there for decades, they're just as much, that business as the owner is in that business. So, getting that, making those kind of people aware of what's out there, because they want to do good. They want to be able to protect the business. But if you don't give them the knowledge that they need to do so, they find it very difficult. Another thing would be to make sure that you are applying your security patches regularly. Kind of those two things are the two good first parts of that defense in depth aspect of things. You want to make sure that you are patching those vulnerabilities and those holes that have been discovered, because that's what's going to be used in a lot of cases when those employees can't be socially engineered. So I would say those are probably if you're not doing anything else and you're not thinking of security in any way, shape, or form whatsoever in your business, those are the two first things that are going to get you the biggest return on investment, and they're going to cost you very little.
And of course, the third big win is to make sure you have a backup. So if you have to restore data anywhere, you can do a restore. And by the folks, test your backups, please. I know of at least 3 clients, and one was a web client who I picked up, but I know of a couple of situations in business where they did backups for years and it turned out the backups weren't good.
So, no, there's a laundry list of things that you can go into there, and backups are extremely important. And definitely, if you're not testing your backup, you might as well not even be backing things up, because if you don't know, I mean, we're not going to play Schrodinger's backup here. You both simultaneously have a good backup and a bad backup until you test it.
So true.
That's a great way, and it's becoming a little less of a silver bullet in the ransomware world now that the ransomware attackers are starting to leak sensitive information.
Yeah.
But it is still a pretty big help to have that backup where you can look at that ransomware attacker and go, look, you're not really holding my data hostage because I have backup copies of it.
Yeah, so true. Virus scanners, a favorite and contentious topic in this business. I personally, as somebody who understands security more than most people, I don't run one. Now, I don't suggest to the average person you do that. Do you have any theories on that and what works well, what doesn't work well, what you should do or not do?
Yeah, I have this conversation all the time. Virus scanners are not in any way, shape, or form the end all be all. They're a
Yeah,
1990 solution to a
yeah,
2020 problem. They will still help you with that low hanging fruit. They
yeah.
will find things wherever they are. I still get emails from Office 365 that say, we can't deliver this email to you because it has a piece of malware in it. So it's still capturing things out there. I've heard 30 to 40% effective is about as good as I've heard. That being said, though, it's still a very important thing to have in a business. And it's more for that peace of mind to the business owner or to that decision maker that we've got that kick plate for the low hanging fruit to trip over, so that we can catch them early before they do anything. Now our biggest when we're working with antivirus, our biggest look is we want central management. So I want to be able to go to a website. I want that single pane of glass, for us, for all of our clients. If you're doing it for one business, you want a single pane of glass over all of your endpoints, so all of your computers. You want to be able to update those signatures regularly, automatically, regularly. You want to be able to do on-access scans and on-demand scans. So whenever whenever one of your users accesses a file, you want to scan it, and then you want to run through a full scan on a daily or a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And that kind of covers those bases, of the very basic level of antivirus stuff. But a couple more things that we look for is that endpoint protection aspects of these. We want to be able to, and our clients, we don't have the luxury of being able to go install all sorts of really fancy, expensive pieces of equipment on the network. So one of the things we do with our antivirus and endpoint protection solutions is to do content filtering. So we want to keep the end users from being able to go to pornography sites or gambling sites or known hacker tool sites or other things like that. So that's another one of those kind of layers in the defense in depth scheme that we use to protect the users. We also a lot of our clients are healthcare and financial companies, since we tend to focus on the kind of the regulated businesses here, and we can do things like prevent the use of USB drives. So we can prevent somebody from coming and plugging in a rogue, potentially infected USB drive and introducing malware onto the network.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we can prevent somebody from inadvertently or intentionally taking sensitive data off that network for nefarious purposes or even benign purposes, just without the knowledge of what they're doing is a wrong way to solve that problem. Yeah. And we can do more things like application control with that, to say I don't want the user to be able to load any applications except for these specific ones. So we really focus a lot more on that endpoint protection side of things than we do the antivirus side of things. But you still need the antivirus just for that low-hanging fruit.
If somebody in a small business was going to run to a store and buy an antivirus, do you have a recommendation or no?
We use Bitdefender currently in ours. Okay. And you're typically not going to run to the store and buy it for your small business. You're going to go through kind of a business portal online to get it. I would heavily recommend that if you are trying to set it up in a business, that you're not just going to the store and buying licenses, because that would typically be for home use and it's not going to give you that single pane of glass view into your organization.
I agree.
Yeah. I know what you meant. It's a euphemism, but I just wanted to make sure that we got that across. Because there are a lot of small businesses that their solution to getting a computer is to go to Best Buy and buy that $300 computer off the shelf that'll fell apart in 6 months.
Yeah, and they do things like that. I know when I was in healthcare, we were a McAfee shop just because McAfee has a central management tool. Norton 365 is a central management tool, but what I find with both of those is they tend to be resource heavy.
Yep. Yeah.
I know for home use, what I usually recommend to people for home use is to go to something like ESET, just because the footprint's a little smaller, but
Yeah, yeah. We've used Trend Micro in the past. We use Bitdefender now. Both of those have good good management consoles and good levels of endpoint, additional endpoint functionality. We've had issues. Another one there is Sophos. We looked at Sophos. It's a little bit more expensive. Bitdefender and Trend Micro tend to be a lot more cost effective for us. The McAfees and the Semantics, they're good tools. They're good tools for very large organizations. We use McAfee in the Air Force, and we had millions, if not billions of dollars of contracts with them for that kind of stuff. And we, rolling out over, 1 million endpoints is nothing to sneeze at. But those do tend to be very resource heavy. And if you are not going out and buying that fastest computer every time you get a new computer in your company, or if you're heavily dependent upon making those computers last long, then the resource hogs are going to impede on your kind of hardware buying strategy. Another one that we don't like is Webroot.
Oh, I so dislike Webroot.
It's consistently lambasted for its kind of low quality, and that 30 to 40% I mentioned earlier is even lower for Webroot. It's a lot of small managed service providers use it because it's free to them, and it's provided through their MSP software providers. But we've just had very difficult times with it. It's not very good. It doesn't have a whole lot of extra functionality.
Yeah.
But MSPs that are focused solely on how much money they can make typically see that, it's a free offering or it's included with their tools. And so they see, well, I can charge you for antivirus and I'm not paying for it. So that's just pure profit for me.
Yeah, so
we don't look at the world that way. We look at it, in a lot better of a way. We want to be cost effective, but at the same time, we want to deliver tools, processes, and kind of things that make sense for the business, rather than just looking at it from a spreadsheet and profit motive standpoint.
Yeah, so true. Passwords, my most unfavorite topic of the world in the security space. we know, and that a lot of breaches are because of weak passwords. People use stuff they shouldn't use. They write passwords down, they throw them under the keyboard. I can recall years ago walking into the hospital data center and finding 2 system passwords underneath the keyboard and looking out one of the tech services guys and said, what the hang is this and why? We've all seen it. Thoughts on passwords and things like password managers? Do you have any thoughts around that?
You just opened up a Pandora's box there, buddy.
I know I did.
I've got lots of thoughts there, and we talk about those passwords under keyboards and things like that. Whenever I talk to people about passwords, I have to explain to them that all these different, this whole ecosystem of passwords is this thing that's been building up over decades.
Yeah.
And generally, password managers are a good thing. People talk about, well, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. I was like, well, if you pick the right basket, it's very well protected. And that's a whole lot better than really the other side of that is using the same password in every website and every login that you have. You're just reusing that same password over and over and over. Yeah. And I cannot count the number of times that I have seen reports of a breach, or even people that I know who have had all sorts of systems or online sites compromised because they just kept reusing that same password over and over and over. Mm-hmm. The best thing about password managers is that you create one strong password or passphrase. I typically recommend a passphrase for your master password in that password manager. And then you don't have to remember any of the rest of those. You just need to create a very memorable passphrase to get in there. And then all your passwords are stored in there. I'll use my password manager to generate passwords for me. And
So do I. Yeah.
I just reset a password this morning for Bitdefender of all things, because I was running up to the time it was going to expire, and all I did was hop into Bitwarden, generated my 50-character long password of uppercase, lowercase numbers, and special characters that was completely random. Pasted it into Bitdefender, updated the record in Bitwarden, and I'm good to go. I don't have to worry about thinking of a password or anything like that. But yeah, password managers are great. They have so much functionality in them. So many. The biggest password issue that we see, like I mentioned, is password reuse, where you're just reusing these passwords over and over and over, which allows an attack called credential stuffing. And if you remember the Spotify note from about a month ago or so, where they said they had 350,000 accounts hacked through a credential stuffing attack, basically taking advantage of people reusing passwords, and they had to have people reset their passwords because they were part of that attack.
I know. I'm a Spotify user, and I got swept up in that, and my Spotify password was a random password. So
yeah. I didn't I read the article. I never heard a thing from Spotify because mine wasn't attempted, I guess, because I don't have any passwords out there that are easily noticed as reused passwords. But I went through my passwords years ago in a previous password manager that I was using called LastPass, and went through and used those internal tools to figure out which passwords that I had that were just reused, and I went and changed them all. Yeah. And so now pretty much, unless, there's a very few passwords that I actually have to remember, but for the most part, I don't have to remember them because they're in my Bitwarden password manager. And so I don't need them to be the same so I can remember them. I don't need them to be short so I can remember them. I don't need them to be memorable. But create those long passwords using the random password generator, where you can't create the passwords, or where you can't use random passwords where you have to remember them. Create long passphrases where you just take 4 or 5 random words and kind of smash them together, or something that's very unique to yourself. A sentence. I usually use the example that my nephew, my 10-year-old nephew, will eat guacamole with a spoon. And so I use the example of, my nephew James eats guacamole with a spoon.
Yeah.
And most modern platforms will take that long of a password. Nobody's going to guess that.
Yeah.
Except the fact that I just told you. But
yeah, I get where you're coming from. I mean, I'm at the point in our household, and for my business, I'm a LastPass fan, but choose one. I mean, they all do a good job. I actually have the family plan, and the reason I do is because if my wife needs access to something, or something happens to me, then she can get at stuff. And they've actually built in tools to say, okay, something happens to me and I don't log in within X period, they'll actually send somebody, you designate your information if you set it up that way. So they've actually built that in now. Their database, and one reason why I like them is, as far as I know, they've never successfully been infiltrated that I know of. They had a scare about a year ago, and then they came back and said, oh, by the way, it was a false alarm. So they're pretty tough in that space. And so is 1Password, so is several of the big password managers. I think you just have to choose one, right? So
yeah, as long as you're going with a well-known one, and it's you can do some research on it, but LastPass is one that I'll throw out. People will the putting your eggs in one basket argument, and I'm like, there's plenty of code audits for these folks.
Mhm.
They've been attacked before. There's one guy, especially with LastPass, there's a guy at Google, Tavis Ormandy,
Yeah.
and he works on Google Project Zero, and he loves to hammer at LastPass. And he'll do something, and he's working on this, as a Google employee, and he will find a flaw or something, and he goes through and does responsible disclosure to log me in, the owners of LastPass,
Mhm.
and they will fix it, and they'll come back out and they'll make a big PR thing of it. It's like, hey, look, we've got this great security researcher that found an issue, reported it to us, we fixed it. You're that much more secure now, because we have these people, that are looking out for your security. But things like LastPass, Bitwarden has gone through numerous code reviews. Bitwarden's code is open source as well, so anybody can go out and look at the code. Look and see what those, kind of what sort of audits, what sort of tests that they go through, for these cloud-based platforms.
Yeah.
And there's, like you said, there's a ton of them out there. You just got to go and look and read up on them, and kind of look for those sort of consumer reports, kind of comparison articles about which one, does this thing better than the other, what they offer, and that kind of thing. Because, they, like LastPass, I used it for a while when we, within my company, my other working business partner, and I will have to share some passwords back and forth, even though I don't like sharing passwords like that. But there are some services where we only get one account, and we have to share that account. And we do the exact same thing you do with your wife. We do that within Bitwarden, and we just say, hey, look, this needs to be shared. We'll share it under the Sullivan Wright Technologies folder, and then either of us have access to it if one of us gets hit by a bus or wins the lottery and moves to Fiji.
Which you wish, but
well, I had long ago, I used to, when I would get up and talk to folks, especially when I was doing security testing for the government, I would get up, on every test and talk about all the flaws we found.
Yeah.
And I used to say, well, what happens when you get hit by a bus and you don't have anything documented? And one of the folks in the out briefing came to me, he says, why does it have to be hit by a bus? Why couldn't we just won the lottery and, immediately quit our government job and move to Fiji? So we just kind of throw both of those in there now, the bad side or the good side.
Yeah. That's a really good discussion. And I think the key is just to do something, and please don't leave your passwords beside your computer. Save us all. Let's go to backups, because that's the key. We talked a little bit about earlier. I'm a big fan of a 3-2-1 backup strategy, first of all. I'm also a big fan of offsite backups. I should tell you, I own 2 Synology NAS servers, one at home and one offsite. They sync. Synology's got some cool little software to actually let you sync 2 NAS servers and keep them in sync. So that works really well. That's overkill for a lot of people, but I also know a story. There was a well-known tech journalist about 2 years ago, whose name I shall not mention. He had his computer stolen out of his house, and guess where the backup drive was sitting? On top of the CPU.
Computer bag, yeah.
So not only did the computer go, the backups went, his writing went. What's a good way for a small business to do backups if they're not going to spend a lot of money, which they probably should, but that's another story.
That's just it. You do need to spend some money on that. And unless you have multiple sites, then you're going to probably go with the cloud-based backup platform. We've got, we use 2 different distinct backup platforms within our company. And one of them is we've kind of built that on our own, and it's a less expensive one for the end user, but it requires them to have somebody like us to do the work. But we require that they buy a small server, or we can create a virtual machine within their environment, and that's their backup server on site. And then that backs up to a server in our office. So it's offsite for them. We have another kind of vendor that we use, I guess not kind of vendor, but vendor that we use that does a similar setup, but they've got a lot more features in there. If you get anything but their lowest tier platform, they send a network attached storage very similar to your Synology. You end up buying that, and that sits on your in your office somewhere, and then you back up to their cloud platform. And the good part about that is if you need to, if something happens and you've got to recreate that server, you can do it practically instantaneously in the cloud. And as part of that service, they give you, I think it's 30 days of cloud operations. So, if heaven forbid your building burns down, you can regenerate that server in their cloud infrastructure, and you can set up an office somewhere else, or you could be working remotely or whatever. It just takes a little bit of IT work to get everybody, tuned away from your now burned down office server to that cloud-based server. So it really takes a lot of that fear and uncertainty out of disaster recovery. But to go back to what you were talking about the tech journalist, that having that backup drive, a little local external drive is probably the worst way you can back up, for all sorts of reasons. Those little drives are not always that sturdy. If you're banging them around and moving them around a lot, they don't have that long of a usage life. If you do happen to carry that around with you and your computer gets stolen, well, your backup just got stolen as well. So now you're kind of SOL for everything. Yeah. And if you keep it plugged into your computer, that's not a real good solution to prevent ransomware, because that's a mapped drive. It's just like your C drive. It'll be your D drive at that point or whatever. And the ransomware is going to see that just like any other drive, and it's going to encrypt that as well. So effectively, it's not even a backup to prevent ransomware there. Mm-hmm. So you really need to have something like one of those cloud-based backups, whether it's something like you have a server and it's really built around an office network, or if you have something where you are installing an agent on your workstation or each of your workstations. If you're really, really small and you don't have office infrastructure, that's probably the better way to go. Yep. Where you're backing up to like a Spider Oak or a Carbonite or something like that. So you have access to that. If you do lose your computer or your computer crashes, all you have to do is get a new computer and go restore your files.
Yeah. And I actually just know from experience, Carbonite, not that the others aren't good solutions, is a really good solution. I had a diabetic crash 12 years ago. I ended up in the hospital for 3 weeks, came out of the hospital, turned my desktop on at the time at home, and all I heard were the words kerchunk, kerchunk, kerchunk. The hard drive died. I went to the local IT shop, picked up a new hard drive, put the hard drive in, did a restore. I mean, and choose one that works well for you. That's the key. For interest's sake, Carbonite is now Canadian owned, and they were sold for over $1 billion to a Waterloo, Ontario firm. So
everything's in Waterloo.
Pardon?
Everything's in Waterloo.
Is in Waterloo. Yeah, that is true. So but it's like choose one, right? It's so key. Yeah. And make sure your backups work. The good news in the security end is this wonderful Adobe product called Flash is about to disappear. Yes. The end of life on Flash is what, as the time of this recording, is 3 days away or something. 3 days away. This January 1st, Flash is gone. In theory, not supported by Adobe, which means there will be no more security updates. Chrome has had all kinds of announcements in their browser that they're not supporting Flash anymore as of the end of the year. So is Edge, so is Firefox, because they're all Chromium based now. Flash should have been gone a long time ago. Pardon, Chris?
Firefox isn't Chromium based.
No, sorry, you're wrong. Opera's Chromium based. Yeah, Firefox is not. But they're all dropping Flash support. So, folks, if you're running Flash, let's get rid of it now, please.
Yeah, you should have gotten rid of it about 5 years ago. But we see this a lot with especially with small businesses and different little niche pieces of software will require that, and they just don't update it. And it takes forever for them to update it, and I'm just waiting for the next couple of weeks. Fortunately, I'm out of the office teaching most of that time, so my business partner and our engineers will be handling that. But there's going to be a lot of complaints from our clients who didn't listen to any of our warnings or came on only in the last few months.
Yeah.
'Cause we've been broadcasting that as well through our newsletter, through our social engineering, or through our social media and everything. So it can't have come soon enough. I have like that's been Adobe Flash has been the bane of the security world for a decade, more than a decade now.
Yeah, I'm tired of it. And frankly, flashlights are slow too. That's the other problem.
Yeah.
So like, let's get it out of there. Um,
It was written for a different time when we didn't have HTML5 and all the fancy front end stuff, and now we do have that, and it's time to move on from Flash to HTML5.
yep, so true. HTML5 should have been shifted a long time ago. No question. And then the last two things I wanted to touch on is let's have a little discussion around 2FA or two-factor authentication, because I think that's important. And I think 2FA is a good idea, but personally, I am not a big fan of cell phone two-factor authentication because of SIM jacking or SIM spoofing. I think that's a big concern. I personally go to what's called an Uber key. So you know what an Uber key is. So I go to a secure.
Yeah, I've got one sitting over there.
I go to one. I've got my wife trained going to one. I've even got working on training my 76-year-old mother on going to one. What's your thought on and the other solution is Google is Authy or some solution like that. What's your thought on using a cell phone for 2FA?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the cell phone as in text messages, I'm absolutely with you, and so are most other people in the security world, because of not just SIM jacking, but the underlying phone system, signaling system 7,
Yep.
is just it's a mess, and they're not going to fix it. So at least here in the U.S. it's always going to be vulnerable, probably Canada too, because you guys are so tied in with we're so tied in together.
We are. Yep.
With what we do. That's never going to get fixed. So that's one of the biggest things when I'm talking about two-factor authentication. I talk about those three options. You either have an SMS text message, you have a phone app, or you have a physical device. And pretty much in my presentations it says bad next to SMS text messages. There's to kind of get going, if you're registering a person in an application or something, it's not terrible. But for regular two-factor authentication, definitely don't use that. If you have any options in another, don't pick that as your first option from an application that you have. Definitely get that. I use Authy, so I'm a big fan of that. That works very well. There's a lot of tie-ins to that where that will be less conspicuous than having to actually type in a 6-digit number. If you are a heavy Google user or a heavy Microsoft user, each of those companies has their own authenticators, Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator, which are even more slick when you're using those tools. Like when I log into a client, I have one client where I've got a global administrator account on their Microsoft Office 365 account, and I've got the Microsoft Authenticator app on my phone, and whenever I log into my account, it just pops up and says, hey, somebody's trying to log in as you. Is this you? And I click accept, and it just lets me go through. It logs me into the Office 365 account. So it's just as easy as having that hardware token that plugs into your USB. But those are great too. I've got one plugged into a USB-C port right now because I'm doing some work for my education client is very keen on the security stuff as well. Since we're actually teaching cybersecurity, it's probably a good idea to practice what you preach. Yeah. But we're all tied in with YubiKeys there. Or actually that's an option, and I've chosen that option. And they use that option considerably within their office as well. But kind of that's my ecosystem for that.
Yeah.
There's other ones, if you work in a large corporation, they might give you a different kind of token that pops the numbers up every 30 seconds or so. If you've been around big corporations for a while, that's fairly common. You know, I had one at FIS. I had one at MITRE before that. When I was in the military, we had our ID cards with a chip in them. We call them common access cards. The civilian federal government calls them PIV cards, personal identity verification, I think, or something. But they're the same card. It's just got a chip in it. You plug it into a specialized reader and go to town. So there's lots of options, but for small businesses, you've really got two good options, and that's that phone app, or that's that YubiKey, or some kind of like FIDO U2F compliant USB key, or even they're doing near field communication ones as well, where you can just kind of put it up to your Android or your Apple phone, and it recognizes it.
Yeah, those are really cool. I know my mom is still working as a real estate agent, and the Toronto Real Estate Board actually has an app that runs on an Android or an iPhone that generates a key every X number of seconds. And if you don't, in the old days, they used to carry a physical device, and now they've just gone to an app. So,
Yep.
it's, and even for her, as she says, it's easy to use, it's not hard. I think once you get in that space and start using it, I made a decision to go to a new Biki a long time ago, and it's, I just feel better, right? It's secure. So
Yep.
that's it.
Yeah, it adds that extra factor of authentication. I mean, if you've got it on your computer, this isn't an all or nothing. Security is not an all or nothing thing. You pick things and you do things that reduce your risk, but don't inhibit you from being able to do your, daily activities. We push that slider farther to the secure side in our company, because we are responsible for data and systems for many, many clients. So we tend to we tend to do 2FA on everything.
Yeah, so do I.
And so it does get a little annoying to us. And we have to remind ourselves that, we've trained ourselves just to have to go peck in a 6-digit number on every application we use. But when working with clients, we often think about, okay, so what is a business owner? Maybe a 90-year-old lawyer. Can we get them, onto these kind of things? And in a lot of cases, it's not an age thing. It's it's an understanding.
Yeah.
I guess an intelligence of the
Yeah.
problem kind of thing. And we'll be able to get some people, who you would think, well, they're too old to be, doing something like this. They just want to, sit down in front of a computer and start typing. Well, no, those tend to be the people who are more aware and want less problems to happen. Some of these younger folks that, just want to pick up their phone and look at it and have, face identification or something, typically have a little bit more difficult time with these applications that you don't have that capability
Yeah.
to do it with. But you do, when we go into businesses, I will always recommend that every administrative level account has that, some sort of two-factor authentication turned on. And then for the executive level folks in that company, I will heavily recommend it. And in some cases, they take that recommendation. In other cases, they don't. But those people who are going to be targeted the most, and they're most visible in that company, the ones whose pictures are on the web page and who are out doing, the glad handing and the marketing, kind of as the face of the company, they're going to be more of a target than that person who is at the reception desk, or that person who is, handling a help desk or taking client calls or something like that.
True. And while you mention that, it brings to me one other thought. You were talking about access. And we haven't really talked about this, but if you're a company, like, seriously, don't give everybody full-blown access. Don't give everybody administrative access. So I'll give you an example. I've got a friend of mine who runs a jewelry store, and their software choice is QuickBooks. And they have a POS on their front PC. They use the shrink wrap, not the cloud based. And one of the things I preached to him when he put the POS in was, We need to set this up so that it only has access to the POS, not all the accounting backend. And he's like, why? That's such a pain. And I said, no, because why do you need your part timer playing around with your accounting? Like, you really got to streamline the access. And whether it's websites, whether it's a piece of software, whether it's any of that, and streamline and tailor to what people need. I know it's work, but it's the best thing you can do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We run into that a lot with software that thinks it needs administrative credentials. One of the worst offenders of just bad security is healthcare software. You know, we
Oh,
talk about
it's terrible. I'll
yeah,
tell you.
we talk about that all the time, and I kind of had this kind of comic picture in my head of somebody wringing their hands. Why can't we solve this cybersecurity problem? But at the same time, they don't want to spend a little bit more money to
Yeah.
make sure that their software is updated. They don't want to put in the effort to do one of 100 things that will help them do this. They don't want to change how they're operating. They just want to keep on in that very insecure method of doing stuff, but they'll continue to wring their hands and ask, why can't we fix the problem? It's like, well, we can't fix the problem because not because anything. We're here and I'm working with clients making recommendations on how do we do this? How do we do this? We'll do everything we can in the background without affecting how you do business. But at some point, you've got to pony up and do some work too, because the attackers know that people like us are in the background doing all the little, closing all the little doors, patching all the little holes, putting locks on the gates and all this kind of stuff. And, they're trying to find new ways to come in. So they found, this big burly front door that they can bust in through, which is, users or password reuse or, something like that. And they'll, they take advantage of those as much as they possibly can. And it's
so true.
It's so hard to get them to do that. But, we fight with that regularly, and we'll have clients ask us, just make everybody a local admin. We're like, no, we will put in the effort not to make everybody a local admin. Who exactly needs this software to run? And is it, so regular that we have to create an exception so that they are a local admin? Or is this something that one of our engineers can connect in and say, accept and type in a password, on a weekly or monthly basis? And so we put a lot of effort into that. It's like, look, we're not doing this just because we want to maintain control over your systems. We're doing this so that you're not putting your foot in your mouth at some point.
Yeah, I know when I do website setup and security for website clients, I'm really, the standard answer is give everybody admin rights, and I just stand there and say no. So what do you really need? It's a great discussion. So the last topic I wanted to talk about is good old Johnny goes to Starbucks, and he decides to take his laptop with him, and he connects to the free Starbucks Wi-Fi. You know where this conversation's going.
Yep.
And then he puts all his passwords in, and somebody's running a sniffer and picks up all his passwords. I actually did this in a Starbucks one day to prove a point to somebody. Walked up and said, by the way, here's all your passwords. And the topic is around VPNs, virtual private networks. Should people be using VPNs?
Yeah, I've got your free Starbucks Wi-Fi right here.
Yeah, thank you.
This is, I've got a little tool in my hand called a Wi-Fi pineapple. And, some of your listeners may have heard about it, but it's a tool specifically for testing those kind of Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi user weaknesses. But yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that, kind of the two aspects there are, I will tell people never ever use a Wi-Fi network unless they trust it, unless they go somewhere and they know where it's from and they validated who is managing that. So don't just go and plop down in that coffee shop for the first time, connect up to whatever Wi-Fi is open and start doing your business. There are plenty of ways to take your information, to even get more than that, and potentially gain some control over your computer that way. So unless you go up and you ask that barista or that that restaurant server or something what their Wi-Fi is, and there's a placard on that front desk that says our Wi-Fi is this, I would never ever use that. And even when you do know what that Wi-Fi is and that you're using that from that specific coffee place, then I would make sure that you have some kind of VPN connection there. And this is, you can have a VPN connection back to an office. So if you do work for a company that has an established office network, you can use that VPN. You probably need to at that point to do some of your work, or you can use one of these kind of internet VPNs where you're not really connecting back to a network, you're just connecting out of the network that you're in securely. And there are tons of those out there. Personally, I use Proton VPN, but that's because I use Proton Mail for
security reasons.
Yeah, for my mail.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of other ones out there. There's a lot that get lambasted because people want to use them as kind of, they think they're going off the grid. And so they use that because the VPN provider says we don't log anything. And it turns out, well, the VPN provider did log things. Yeah. For most people, all you really want to do is get out of this potentially insecure network in a secure way. So most of these are going to work, but I would still say go out and research, look for reviews of these platforms, look for user reviews, things like that. Look for reviews in respected publications first, and see what those look like. Another solution too, and I'll recommend this kind of equally along the lines of VPN, is just take a hotspot. If you've got almost any phone these days, you have the ability to turn your phone into a hotspot.
That is true.
And if you can do that, and if that's something that's within your budget, then that removes your need to deal with trying to determine if that VPN is secure or that Wi-Fi is not a scammer with a Wi-Fi pineapple. And go through that whole rigmarole. You can just walk in, plop down, connect up to your known good Wi-Fi hotspot, and go to town doing your work or doing whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I have a data plan on my phone that Rogers in Canada now offers 150 gigabyte data plan, believe it or not. And I have one, and people laugh at me and say, why? It's because I refuse to use a public VPN. So that means no coffee shops, no hotels, no restaurants, no nothing. And that saves a lot of issues when it comes to sniffing passwords and things like that. So
yeah, I typically will prefer I'll go through my iPhone. I think I have like a 15 gig or something. So it's not a lot, but I don't need it that much.
Yeah.
And I will use that as a primary means, unless I'm going into a place that I absolutely know, like one of my known coffee shops around here or a client office or something like that.
Yeah. And Chris, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for all your wisdom and your tips. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how's the best way?
Best way would be email, since I tend to be in and out a lot. And that's chris@swtechpartners.com.
Yeah. And you have a really good newsletter that people should drop on over and sign up for. It's invaluable. What's the URL for the newsletter?
It's our webpage is swtechpartners.com. I'm not sure if we have our sign up on the webpage yet. We've been talking about that.
You should.
But if you just want to drop me an email, I'll add you to the list. But we publish that at the beginning of every month. Try to really focus on what small business owners and decision makers can use, that are knowledge that they need to know from the security arena that's not in mainstream news. So something that didn't quite make it in mainstream news, but it's still important enough to alert them to.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chris, for your time, and Happy New Year, and have a great day.
Thanks, Rob.
A very special thank you to Christopher Wright for joining me on this podcast. I hope you enjoyed the security chat and you found it very insightful and helpful. If you want to get in touch with me, please email me, vip@stunningdigitalmarketing.com, or go to my website, stunningdigitalmarketing.com, and drop me a note. I can be found on all major social platforms, Twitter, @RobCairns, Facebook, Instagram, and even Quora. So look me up and let's have a chat. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns, and my wife, Jill McLean Cairns. I love you both very much. Keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars and make your business succeed. Bye for now.